My name is Martha McFarlane Fays. I'm with the State Historic Preservation Office, and thank you for being here. This is going to fly, I am told. So I'm gonna get started. So I'm gonna be very brief. You're here to see Threads, the story of Herman Miller, as told in words and pictures. And we have Steve Frykholm here, who is pictures, and Clark Malcolm, who's words. And they both combined have 75 years of experience, I guess, with Herman Miller, and we'll be here to tell the story. So enjoy.
Thank you. Thanks for loaning
Morning.
us your Saturday morning. Is this working? Yes? I feel like we ought to be having dinner or breakfast or something instead of sitting.
Breakfast would be a good idea.
Sitting in the auditorium. We're going to try to be really quick because we're afraid in an hour we're not going to get by much. And we'd like to welcome you to this kind of brief and idiosyncratic look into Herman Miller. We were asked a couple years ago to put together a presentation that explained to people why we've stayed at Herman Miller so long. Simple stupidity might have been the real answer, but this presentation came out of it. And so we only have a couple of rules. One is to interrupt whenever you like and ask a question, and since there's so few of us, that might be easier than usual. Frykholm will interrupt me any minute, and I will interrupt him constantly, so that's one rule. The other rule is we promise to tell you the truth, but we don't guarantee any of our facts, so don't hold us to what we say this morning. This is kind of an entertainment. What else, Frykholm? What are the other rules?
You must have had a good night's sleep last night, man.
I think you're on your game. We're going to get through this.
Anyway, this is going to be so few of you. If you want to move up closer so we're more conversational, that'd be fine. But these are the topics or the threads that we have listed up here. And as we thought about the conference and while you all may be here, we decided that we'd eliminate two. One will be expressions and the other will be research. And we're trying to leave the threads up there that might be or have some things in it that are relevant to mid-century. I mean, stuff and designers that were here in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
You explained they're going to pick them, right?
Yeah, well, all except for one.
Yeah.
We're going to start out with Providential.
And we're going to start out with Providential. You ready?
Yeah, it's there.
Go. Providential.
We also get, into a dueling match sometimes with these clickers.
Yeah, so
if he slows down, I may just keep him moving. I don't know.
It's like we've been married for about 20 years, I think. Providential is a big word at Herman Miller. It started off with this guy. You can make a case that D.J. Dupree really created the contract office furniture by some of his choices. He certainly created Herman Miller with a few of his choices. He was born in 1891. In 1909, he began to work for Michigan Furniture, the Star Furniture Company.
Michigan Star.
In 1923, he bought the company with help from his father-in-law, Herman Miller, and renamed the company Herman Miller. And then in 1927, he had the first of three providential events in his life that really changed the company and I think actually helped change West Michigan. And the first one we're going to let him tell you about. DJ was a young manager. He was a remarkable guy. His judgment of poetry stinks. Don't look up the poetry. He was a real judge of character, however, and he was part of a generation that included some well-known design names you'll see there on the left, all born in the space of about 4 years. DJ outlived them all, according to Frykholm, because designers have more stress in their lives than businessmen. But I'm not sure about that. DJ was learning how to be a manager. In fact, he confessed sometime around that, when that interview was taped, that he's still worried, even into his 90s, that he had never shaken hands with the millwright. And the reason he hadn't shaken hands with him was because he was afraid he was going to get his hands dirty. and he had been ashamed of that for almost 80 years. So it's a remarkable insight into this guy who changed Herman Miller and also West Michigan.
What about Frank Lloyd Wright and what he may have said about DJ?
Wonderful, thank you. Frykholm and I have wondered why it was that DJ was so open to new things, including a new attitude about labor. Frank Lloyd Wright described his perfect client as somebody with untainted ideals and unspoiled instincts, which is a wonderful way to think about DJ. He was, to the end of his life, completely sure of his own beliefs, but also completely open to what other people might teach him. So this was the first event that he described as providential. It was the foundation for Herman Miller's relationships with people and labor, and continues to the day. In the 20s, you know, Grand Rapids was the center, a center for furniture manufacture. 50 furniture manufacturers here in Grand Rapids, employing, I think, a quarter of the labor force. And DJ was right in the middle of all this excitement. Of course, that was about to change in 1929, and half of the companies here went out of business. Herman Miller was about to go out of business when this guy walked into West Michigan, we think into the Keeler building. Yes?
Yes, Keeler.
Keeler building, which is...
That is on Division. It's just north of that parking lot that's across the street from the Civic Theater. That's where a lot of the companies in town had their showrooms.
And 4 times a year, the salespeople, the sales force from all over the United States would show up in Grand Rapids to place their orders. So you can imagine what this did to the furniture manufacturers, having to change their lines 4 times a year. DJ and the others were really worried in 1930. This guy, anybody know who he is? This is always, you do, Jabari. Good for you. A lot of people don't know him. He's kind of the forgotten father of modernism in the United States. He died as a young man. Gilbert Rohde, he was born and grew up in Brooklyn. His parents were Austrian. He had been to Europe and had studied at the Bauhaus. He showed up here with some drawings under his arms. And of all the manufacturers in Grand Rapids, only DJ Dupree decided to give him a chance. And we still don't know why that was. DJ called Gilbert Rohde the answer to his prayers. And Gilbert became connected to Herman Miller, and over the next 14 years led the company in an entirely different direction. By the time he died in 1944, we no longer made any reproductions, which most people continue to make, yes? What else about Gilbert do you like?
Well, Gilbert...
He was a smart aleck. That's what Frykholm liked about him.
Who, Gilbert?
Yeah,
Was
he
a smart?
was.
No, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, when DJ made the decision, which he really believed his prayers were answered, I believe. And a little thing about why we called this thread providential. DJ was a very devout Christian. He prayed a lot, and he believed that all the major milestones that happened to Herman Miller were providential. Personally, I think it may have been done luck, but I'm not going to deny him his beliefs. So the thing about Rohde that I found interesting, when DJ asked him how much a set of drawings would cost him, the going rate in Grand Rapids at the time was $250. The designers would go into the various showrooms, the people in charge of those companies would pick what they wanted to do and pay the designer $250, and they'd make the product, and that was all the commission or money the designer would make. So Rohde said, I want $850, and after he picked up DJ off the floor, DJ said, I don't have that kind of money. And Gilbert said, okay, you make the furniture. If you sell them, I'll take a commission. And as far as I know, that's the first of the royalty situation in the industry. Was
3%.
About that time, 3%.
3% royalty. Ada Louise Huxtable called modernism a kind of combination of moral and aesthetic. And I think for DJ, this is what this guy represented. He told DJ to his face that he was dishonest by producing earlier designs and not inventing his own. And DJ listened to that and eventually came to agree with him that copying older designs was a kind of immoral way to do business.
See, now you mention that, though. DJ also told Gilbert Rhodey that what his furniture looked like or what the drawings looked like could have been done in manual training school. So they sort of had this thing, but if you remember, everybody is extraordinary. I think DJ may have remembered that
think
story.
he believed this.
And so, in fact, a lot of the designers at Herman Miller, like George Nelson and the Eameses and whatever, DJ would listen to them, and we might save that for another story.
Maybe. Oh, anyway.
Oh, sorry, Clark.
Don't do that, not yet. So
We got to keep moving.
I'm trying. So in 1944, these guys are good buddies, DJ and Gilbert. Gilbert occasionally writes DJ and asks him for an extra $100 because he's a little short for the month. And DJ sends him a check. It's all pretty cozy. He brought us showrooms. He got us into the merchandise mart. And then maybe the answer to why we don't know him very much today is that in the spring of 1944, in a restaurant called Le Beaujolais on East 60th Street, he took a bite of French pastry and keeled over dead in his plate after his last words, which were, "That's the best French pastry I've ever had in my life." And it turned out to be true. And over he went. This was the second heart attack. So first it was Millwright, and then it's Rhodey.
Something about heart attacks.
Something about heart attacks in Herman Miller.
So then DJ is really floundering again because, okay, he was dependent on Gilbert Rhodey and Gilbert Rhodey's studio to produce the drawings and the furniture designs. We've also been doing some investigation and research about what was happening during this period of time. And Donald Deskey, I would say, was a peer of Rhodey, and Clark mentioned that Rhodey brought modern furniture to Herman Miller, which is the truth, but Deskey was also very influential. If we compare the photographs and the designs of the two, much like the furniture industry today, unless you really are intimate with the knowledge of their furniture lines, you might get confused who makes it. But anyway, DJ is looking for a new director of design. He's doing a lot of reading. He went to New York, interviewed people like Russell Wright and some others, and started praying again, I'm sure, and he read an article, an architectural form on a storage wall. George Nelson was a very good writer, and he was the editor of Architectural Form, and he wrote this article on the storage wall, which was solving the problems of people and where do you put all your stuff. And as a result of that, DJ had some conversations with George. As we understand it, he also visited New York with a contract in his hand for Russell Wright. And I don't know whether he was interviewing several people at one time, but his gut told him when he entered his office, Russell Wright, this isn't going to work. He just he couldn't handle Russell's ego and his big head. He just walked out, as we have heard the story. So he gave, he and George struck up a conversation. It's an interesting relationship. I personally believe that George's period of time where he brought in the Eameses, I remember the story that he called DJ, told him he should come visit New York. There's a wonderful show at MoMA. You need to see this stuff. And it was the designs of Charles. And George said, DJ, we need them. We need them in the firm. And DJ said, why? They'll just be taking money out of your pocket. And George simply said, we need them. He had if you look at the George Nelson studio, he had some very wonderful designers go through that studio. And he had just a knack for hiring excellent designers. It reminds me of Hill's presentation yesterday where he had the Saarinen studio and identified all those stars that left and went on to create their own studios. Same thing happened with George and the people that work for him. Anything else? Am I missing anything?
Well, I just wanted to point to this audience that might think that George Nelson has always been a hero When I started working for Herman Miller in the early 80s, George, shortly before Nelson's death, he came to Ann Arbor 4 times to speak to the architecture school. No one in the architecture school and no one at Herman Miller bothered to ask him out to dinner. And he was stuck, that was his reputation at the time. He was almost forgotten. And a friend of mine at Herman Miller, who did know who he was, asked him to dinner. And so for 4 times, he came over to this little apartment in Ann Arbor, and we all smoked and drank martinis, and it was really a lot of fun. And George told us some stories, and he was a wonderful guy, but his reputation today is a lot better than it was 30 years ago.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned the martinis and the smoking and all that. What was interesting is here you have DJ Dupree, Bible-toting, religious, teetotaler, developing a relationship with George, non-practicing Jew, heavy smoker, drinks martinis. In fact, we heard that the first meeting they had, George had a couple martinis, and then he found out later that was just not done with DJ, and he never did that again at dinner when they had dinner, never had a martini.
According to DJ's son, Max, Nelson and DJ fell in love with each other, and the two of them used to spend hours looking at Lake Michigan out at Holland State Park, plotting the future of modern design in Herman Miller, and apparently it worked. Anyway.
No, I just one more point. I look at Rhodey as bringing modern to furniture or to Herman Miller. I look at this guy and the people he brought to the company, Ismo Noguchi, the Eameses, Eameses brought in Gerard. Well, they gave us a reputation bigger than life. When I joined the company in 1970, we were an $18 million company. And I remember I was working at a type shop when I took the job at Herman Miller, and these average folks, I said, wow, you're working at Herman Miller. Wow. It was just like this reverence. Anyway, George's interest in furniture and the Eameses, Eames Demetrius disagrees with me, but I think their interest in Herman Miller and the furniture and designing furniture was waning. George had other interests. Eameses liked to make films, do exhibition work. Who knows what the tug of wars may have been between the two businesses. And DJ happened to be in Colorado. Clark heard some interesting information about his trip to Colorado, so why don't you talk about that?
We're going to go through this guy real quick because he's more modern history of Herman Miller.
He started in 70, so we'll drop him off real fast.
We'll drop him off real fast. This is Bob Probst. He was another character choice of DJ Dupree's. DJ was in Boulder visiting his son by pure accident. He was directed to hear a kind of kooky inventor and lecturer named Bob Probst, and he went down to hear what he had to say, was interested in his point of view. Probst, like Nelson, had never designed any furniture before, and yet DJ hired him to be the design director at Herman Miller. And Probst moved to Ann Arbor in 1960, invented Action Office in 1968, and the company took off and really grew astoundingly for 20 years into what it is today, as did the West Michigan.
Actually, Clark, he was hired to be head of research for Herman Miller. Bob hated to be called a designer. I made that mistake once. You don't do it again, because he had a blood sugar problem. In the afternoon, he could be a real tyrant.
But he put his stamp on Herman Miller.
He did, and he spawned an industry with systems furniture.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, you can interrupt us
anytime.
Now, Clark, we took way too long.
What?
So anyway, this is the deal. Remember, we're trying to stick to the topic of the conference. Nobody can pick research, and nobody picks expressions, because we just won't go there. And so look at these topics, these threads carefully. These are actually the reasons Clark and I are still with the company. These are core attributes or beliefs or practices that Herman Miller has done since the beginning of Rhodey. You know, Clark
You owe
called
me
that.
$1.
Clark said, "You wait. Somebody's going to pick honesty."
I knew it. You know, we've never had that ask of us in New York, but the West Coast always asks for honesty. It's very interesting.
Yeah, we were in Vancouver, Seattle, Portland doing this presentation, and usually the first one that people ask for there was honesty. It was such a puzzle to me that I finally asked one, "Why did you pick honesty?" So we're going to honesty.
Okay, who starts? I forget.
It's got my name on it.
Yeah.
So this is one of Rhodey's early pieces. We thought it'd be a good slide to have to talk about honesty. This is what D.J. Dupree thought looked like manual training school work, void of the ornamentation, the unique qualities, the different veneers, whatever, how many hours went into this, which was really, as Gilbert Rhodey mentioned later in a brochure, antiques made to order. I always like that term. You know, before Rhodey, this was the work Herman Miller was doing. Bedroom suites, dining room suites, furniture for the living room.
And in case you think that DJ was really prescient when he made his decision, he hedged his bets for about 6 years in the 30s and made both this stuff and Rhodey's.
He didn't just flip the switch. Oftentimes we believe that, but yeah, Clark was right. We were still selling Rhodey stuff in the early 40s until George came. And when George designed the 48 catalog, 4 years after Rhodey died, there was not one stick of Rhodey furniture in the catalog. We find that interesting. Anyway, this is Rhodey's solutions for the same rooms in the dwelling. Nelson had never designed furniture in his life. And so he wrote this letter to DJ when you know, he was asked to be the director of design. And this is George's answer. I can't believe, I mean, no designer today is going to write a letter like this, in my opinion. But hey, the lack of my experience, you're going to have to make the decision on your own, I'm afraid. And it is just so refreshing to have that direct honesty in someone. And George also, I mean, DJ and the leaders were so dependent on George and the designers to help them not only in design decisions, but give their points of view about business strategy, as Clark mentioned earlier, and other issues of the in the company. But one day, I guess George has had it and said, look, you're going to have to solve some of these problems on your own. This is an example of an annual report that Clark and I worked on, and it was kind of a crappy year. Okay, we had good news, bad news. It was very important to the CEO at the time that people really know what was good and what was bad. So we went ahead with these weather icons, and
He was not very symbolic.
and Dick said, oh, next year's going to be better. And so I said, that's great. We'll put a sun on the back cover, and that would be done deal. We're ready to go to the printer. DJ or Dick calls me up, says, Steve, it's really not going to be that hot. No worries, Dick. We'll just take care of that. So we went ahead and put a cloud in the back cover, and we're fine. This is a really interesting one. In fact, I'm going to use this for something I just heard when I took the tour at Genesis last week. The Nelson office was working on a high-back version of the coconut chair. And suddenly, we got a memo that Clark and I discovered in the archives from the Nelson office, and they decided to stop working on it. I mean, check it out. The chair's ugly. It's uncomfortable. We've wasted tons of time, tons of money. We're not going to do any more. And I just found, wow, what designer again would say this to a client? Not too many, I think.
We think this is where we think this has influenced people at Herman Miller today. We talk about these stories, and we really do believe this is where the examples of just being honest about stuff come from.
And then the last paragraph, which in this environment is large enough to read, they apologize for the wasted time, the wasted money, just a real nice stroke of honesty. Here's one. Herman Miller started to hit the skids back in 2008, along with a lot of other people. This email came from the CEO right before the holidays and saying, hey, things are pretty tough. We're going to be reducing $60 million worth of stuff. Some people are going to be laid off, blah, 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 blah. And
he continued these emails.
He continued these messages on a very regular basis until things turned around. So that's honesty. Went through that one pretty quick.
And I'd go back again to the feeling that in design, we talk about honesty in design, and I do believe that it spills over into the way Herman Miller tries to do business. But modernism as a combination of aesthetics and morality really seems to me a good definition of what goes on at Herman Miller.
I forgot to mention. Now I forgot what I was going to say. So go ahead and pick one. Pick carefully. We'll go on. Yeah.
All right.
Serendipity. Oh, I like this one, too.
We like this one, too. This is Frykholm's motto for life, serendipity.
That's right. You know, yes, we have attributes in our product design of originality, but I also believe that serendipity is an important part of design. I mean, if we really look at the Nelson period, I mean, we weren't selling that much furniture in really like the marshmallow sofa and some of the other designs that they did, but I believe they were just fooling around, messing around. I might also mention, I forgot to mention earlier, for continuity, George actually hired Irving Harper and Ernest Farmer from the Rohde office because he knew that he had never designed furniture. He wanted some continuity, some expertise, and actually our logo. Let's say today, if we were going to start a company and we wanted a nice logo, we had high aspirations, we would probably go to a branding firm, one that had a good reputation, one that we could afford. I remember in the 80s, we were going to take a look at some branding. We went to Ansbach Grossman in Portugal, in New York, and they said, around 50 grand. Well, Herman Miller, I know Herman Miller wouldn't spend 50 grand to do a branding study to come up with a logo. And I just mentioned that because the way ours happened was very serendipitous.
The Herman Miller logo emerged because at that time we had
the mark, it was the M, because it was the M on Miller. But how about that innocence from George? I mean, from Irving. I mean, we taped this interview when he was 95. I think he's 96, 97 now, still alive. Rizzoli just published a book of his design work, and in there you will see a lot of paper sculptures that he has designed. They're just marvelous things and constructed. But then we went ahead and asked him another question. And rationale and justification, but I think this gets back to DJ and his belief that we're all extraordinary, we all have individual talents, and he listened to them. Now, I doubt if Rohde, I'm sure if DJ had asked George would have
romanced
the hell out of it, but anyway, it's red. This was one of my pieces.
Speaking of focus groups of one, here's Frykholm's focus group.
Herman Miller has an annual picnic. They started having picnics back in the 20s on an irregular basis, about from 1947, the best I can recall from the archive records. It became a regular annual event ever since. It was a big deal. And so I was hired at Herman Miller in 1970. I was the first internal graphic designer. Before I joined the company, the graphics were done by the design office that did the furniture. They also did the showrooms. So they did it all. I mean, they were really multidisciplined studios. But anyway, I was the first guy. internal graphic designer. And one of our executives came to me one day and said, you know, we have a picnic here. It's a pretty big deal. You're a designer. Do you suppose you could do a poster for the picnic? We've never had one. So I learned how to screen print when I was in the Peace Corps in Nigeria. So I said, sure, we'll take a whack at it. A colleague and I came in one day, I had an ear of corn. I wanted a picnic theme. And what more says picnic than an ear of corn? I put it in my mouth. I said, draw me, Phil. He drew a little sketch. From that little sketch, I went ahead. We had the screen made, the stencils made, so forth. And we did the poster. We did 50 of them down the cellar of one of our administration buildings. So I guess I didn't want the fumes of the inks. You know, back then they were really ink, let me tell you. Really nice. Anyway, we did 50. We entered it into a national competition. Then I read the fine print of the entry form. It said, must be done in quantities of 500 or more. We had done 50, so I was having a little remorse. I went to the fellow I reported to. I said, Howard, we entered this competition. They said we had to print 500. We only printed 50. I feel really bad. He said, if you get in, we'll print 500. That's what happened. We got into the exhibition. He made good on his word. We printed 500 posters. They sold out immediately at cost, and that actually gave us a budget for all the following years, because we would print these posters and then we would sell them. And some of the early ones we printed as many as 4 times. They were that popular. And I ended up doing 20 before I passed the baton to another one of our young designers.
And the reason, go back, Frykholm's a little honest. These things are in museums all over the world. Go back, wait.
Let me do it.
All right. So they're really in museums all over the world, just by chance, because some guy wanted a poster for a picnic back in 1970. But I think what mystifies Frykholm and me is that how has Herman Miller parlayed these accidents into something that's so good for the company? There's so many people who meet Herman Miller through these posters who may not even know we make furniture. But all because somebody was open enough to a new idea at one point in time.
And Clark called me a focus group of one because I never showed the designs to anyone. And I have a bad rap of only getting them finished in time for the picnic, which never bothered me because I always viewed them as a commemorative poster rather than announcing the picnic, because if you lived in Holland, Michigan, and you knew your whole family was going to be given a half a barbecued chicken, all the side dishes, all the snacks, you don't need an invitation to get to the picnic. You know it's going to happen. This is a wonderful example. I mean, just think about these reputable designers, and if you were the Duprees, you were having a master class in design. And in the early 70s, about mid-70s, the Walker Art Museum in Minneapolis decided to dedicate all 7 of their galleries to an exhibition on Herman Miller. Eames, Nelson, Gerard, Probst, the design process at Herman Miller. That was the name of the exhibition. It was the first time in years that these folks were all together. And so we figured it was a good photo op. The photo on the left was done by the official photography. She's a good photographer, Judy Lawson. We've used her on other work, but you know, this was very formal.
And they weren't very happy.
Our internal, well, tell them why they weren't happy.
They weren't happy because the blank space to the right of Bob Probst was taken up by a Herman Miller executive who had arranged all this and frequently took credit for these people's work, and they really didn't like him very much. And you can tell by the expression on their faces, particularly George. And look at, they're just, Probst never thought anything was funny, but the rest of them are just not very happy. Well, the executive excused himself to go to the bathroom, and
George, we suspect it was George, if you look at the smirk on his face on the one on the right, told a joke at Bob's expense, and everybody really found some humor in that. And our internal communication person happened to be behind Judy with her camera and got the shot that I actually prefer to use. For those of you, we haven't identified Gilbert Rohde. There were the Ameses, that's DJ.
Gerard,
sorry, and Bob Probst. So again, just serendipity, being at the right place at the right time. This is another one. I was in a studio. We were taking a picture of the sling sofa for an annual report that Clark and I were working on. I mean, it's kind of boring. So I said, I called our project manager. I mean, she's a wonderful project manager, Diane Groney. I said, hey, Diane, you think you could get me a Dalmatian dog for the afternoon? She said, I'm on it. So 2 hours later, she called me up. She said, Steve, in about an hour, you're going to have 7 Dalmatian puppies. Now, that's going above and beyond. Don't you think? That's a great project manager. When they came in the studio, I think 3 jumped on the sofa right away. 4 went off to the corner to do their business. And we got a wonderful shot, and that's how we used it in the annual report. Again, serendipity of the moment. I had no idea. This wasn't planned. Where are we? This is yours.
We talked about the picnic posters as ways people have come to see Herman Miller, be introduced to Herman Miller. Some of the books that Max Dupree has written over the years is another way. These books began as a total accident. In fact, I think John Barry had a hand in this. In the middle 80s, Max came up to me in the airport in the Newark airport and asked if I'd be interested in writing a book together. I was a lot younger than I am now and a lot dumber. And I said to him with a straight face, do you have anything to say? And he looked at me, and I didn't really know who he was. And to his credit, he didn't blink, he didn't get mad. He went away and said, well, I'll think about that. And in a couple weeks, he called back and said he did have something to say, and he and I went on to do 5 books together. This particular one has sold almost 1 million copies and used by the U.S. Navy and all over. It puts into words what Herman Miller aspires to be, and it was pretty much an accident, and Max and I always thought of it as a lark. Here's another kind of happy accident. Do you recognize these chairs? Ergon chairs, the first kind of ergonomic seating done in 1976. Bill Stumpf, who went on to have a huge impact on Herman Miller, had been hired to work for the company. He didn't like West Michigan. He moved back to Madison, and the CEO at the time had the brains to say, Bill, here's a check. Go pursue your vision. And Stumpf came back in a few months with this chair, which began the ergonomic seating business, which we all enjoy today. In this presentation, Frykholm and I,
Purely spontaneous.
we had no idea we were going to be doing this today, but it's turned out to be fun, and Herman Miller, for us, certainly worth hanging around, right?
Yeah, we've actually been doing these presentations for a couple of years. We thought it was a one-night gig when we did it in California.
All right.
All right, now.
Questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Any questions about any of that?
Now we're down to about, you got one more choice,
more
I think,
pick.
before we'll get the hook. Yes.
Do we have time to cover process of design?
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll make
We get
time.
it. Yeah, we get it, Frykholm.
Let's see.
is a
Clark,
good
you
one.
start this one out.
Do I?
think. Yeah.
We put it in here because of a chance remark of the current VP of design that once a product or an idea gets through the company, it may not always be a success, but at least it has the legs to withstand the kind of scrutiny and the process at Herman Miller, which is not easy. We start with this story about some, what do you call them, derby.
Pine Box Derby. In
cars,
quotes.
built totally as a lark by the engineers at Herman Miller to enter in a competition sponsored by Nike several years ago. And we want to show you some good old home videos. You can imagine the engineers in the back rooms at Herman Miller having a ball with this. This is, to me, the perfect picture of an engineer's mind, playing with cars on the weekends in the back room of your company. These guys went on to win the competition. We beat Ford, Chrysler, and GM. The red car won the best overall, and the other car won the most popular. Amazing cooperation between designers. Most projects at Herman Miller start with a research or defining the problem. This is, believe it or not, the very beginning of the Air-on Chair. It was a project to study the needs of older people. Every project ends up at some point listing its criteria. This project, it happened in Ann Arbor, was called Metaform. Here were our criteria. At some point, we always build models of various sizes. Bill Stump had a wonderful time building entire environments, apartments, houses, for a range of products to help older people stay at home longer and safer and with a little bit more comfort. The ideas that Bill and Don Chadwick discovered in Ann Arbor, looking at long-term seating for older people, led to the Air-on Chair. Every project, every new product ends up at some point with a kind of concept book. This is the one for the Air-on Chair, the recline mechanism, and finally the guys in their chair. They're very happy guys, having made a fortune off this chair. This is a series of models. You can see the changes that this particular chair, called the Mira, went through from the beginning to end. 7.5, a design firm in Berlin, endured all the engineers and all the different models that this had to go through over what, 5 years?
That was the one we produced, in case you're going the opposite direction.
This one. I don't know how long this took, but it took a lot of energy out of everybody. Here are models for Setu, which is another chair we produced today, brought to us by the same group, 7.5. And you can see all the different variations. You can barely see the variations. But this spine went through 20 or 30 different iterations. Frykholm.
This is Pep
guy.
Nagelkirk. He was a chief model maker, and he often assisted our designers in bringing their product to a state where it would be a commercial situation. There was a lot of respect between Pep and the designers. They worked, they collaborated, they worked, they resolved issues, and unlike the engineers, where there was probably a little more tension, a lot more tension sometimes.
The model making is also a really important
Yeah,
part.
and the test lab. I mean, what's the sign we're going to get made for this
The
room?
sign, the test lab engineers like to call this the place where dreams come to die. We're getting a 10-minute sign. So,
Right.
so don't bring your ideas in here, but the ones that survived have something to them.
Another part of the process of design is iterative work. Some people might call it value engineering, where they might like to dumb down a product, but this is an example where it actually has improved. 7.5 took the original Mira chair in 2004. They weren't that satisfied with it. This is the latest version that we introduced just recently. It is 10 pounds lighter and supports 50 pounds more.
Okay, Frykholm, we're going to have to stop.
Well, we're going to show them this. We got time.
Go
We got
ahead.
time.
This is
Okay,
the- this is the real process
I
of
mentioned
design.
hard work in the design process. We happened to be in Bath, England, for a rugby team. Herman Miller was the sponsor of the local team in Bath. The money we gave to them helped children at risk in the community. And this is a scrum for those of you who have never seen one. Here it is.
So this is the real process of design. No one knows where the ball is. Nothing happens. People hurt each other.
It doesn't just
and-
happen. Now,
Okay.
we designed this program really to never get finished with it. That was my intent. So don't feel we cheated you or whatever. It was just this thing I have that I'd rather you wish we could have said some more stories, told some more stories. I'd rather have that than one of these guys going to get off the stage.
Oh, the answer to that is pretty soon.
Pretty
about
soon,
5
yeah.
minutes. We'd like to end with a video we did for Bill Stumps. We mentioned him before. He's a designer who worked for Herman Miller for 40 years. We end with a little video we did for his memorial service. He died 8 years ago, way too young. For us, he epitomizes what design means at Herman Miller, the best qualities of humor and originality and compassion. And we always end with this, and we hope you like him.
Yeah, I
as
might
we do.
add, even though Bill's influence in the company was from the mid-'70s forward, I mean, the process is the same, whether and the attitudes and good designers.